And now, the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a space for ideas and reflections in our uncertain times.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. He is not standing in front of the machine, he is inside it, not swallowed, assembled. A man made of routines, wages, clocks and quiet refusals, calibrated for output. His memories have become untranslatable within this structure. The sound of trees cracking under frost, the sudden softness of an animal's breath, the moment before a kiss that never became a memory. These have no value in the system, not because they are worthless, but because they cannot be rendered as labour. And so they fade, not from the world, but from the structure of the world that counts. This is the theft that precedes all others, not money, not land, but time, the slow theft of becoming. The system does not just extract labour, it extracts being. It teaches him to see his body as cost, his desire as inefficiency, his joy as laziness. Every spreadsheet, every schedule, every quota conceals a wound, not absence, but misrecognition. What he is cannot be seen inside what he does. And still he works, because not working would be death, but working is not life. He is split, alive in motion, dead in rhythm. The contradiction is not a flaw, it is the fuel, a design built to make him feel the cost of not producing, while never producing what would make him feel whole. This is not history, this is architecture. The world does not fall into these shapes by accident. He wakes in a room shaped by profit. He walks streets shaped by surplus extraction. He speaks a language whose metaphors were rewritten by factories. Even love here trembles under the weight of transaction. Even art becomes an apology for not working. And yet, within this machinery, something flickers. A refusal too quiet to be named. A moment that cannot be monetized. The scent of dust before rain. The unspoken memory of a hand that didn't strike. These are the ruins of something older than the system. Something that will outlive it. This essay begins there, not at the point of critique, but at the site of the wound. Not to fix it, but to follow its shape, to understand what kind of world must be built to make a man invisible to himself and what it would take to make him visible again. There is a difference between being owned and being arranged. Ownership is crude, explicit, reversible. Arrangement is subtler. It moves through expectation, environment, repetition. He is not a prisoner of force, but of pattern. The factory no longer needs to chain his body. It has already trained his mind to wake up anxious, to tie self-worth to performance, to measure days by output, not experience. This is the success of the system. It has replaced domination with choreography. But choreography cannot feel, it can only move. And he begins to notice the numbness, not pain, numbness, a slow disconnection from what used to matter. He eats without tasting, touches without being touched, speaks without meaning. The contradiction is complete. He must perform aliveness to survive while being slowly emptied of life. He was not born into this. He was led here, a path paved with good intentions, advice, incremental compromises. He was told to work hard, save, contribute. No one mentioned what would be taken. No one explained that the cost of survival might be his interiority, or that his labour would be both necessary and insufficient. The system needs him to believe he is free, so it lets him choose between options it designed. And still he doubts himself. Maybe it's his fault, maybe he's ungrateful, maybe others are suffering more. The brilliance of the system lies in how it personalizes what is structural. Alienation is redescribed as burnout. Exploitation becomes the grind. What he cannot bear alone is made to look like an individual failing. This is not just ideology, it is intimacy weaponized. Yet something resists, not in slogans or movements, but in small, unassimilated moments. He notices the way sunlight falls on concrete. He hears birdsong against the noise of traffic and does not turn away. He forgets to perform and feels something real. It passes quickly. But it lingers. These moments do not dismantle the system, but they puncture its totality. They hint at a different kind of value, a different way of being. The system cannot monetize them, so it denies their existence, but he remembers, or rather his body remembers, that it was once more than productive, that it was once whole. The point is not to romanticize escape. There is no outside. The point is to track these fractures, these glimmers, to trace how alienation enters the body and how the body sometimes refuses, to ask, What remains of the human when everything human has been redefined by capital? The structure has evolved. It no longer requires belief. It thrives on participation without conviction. He no longer needs to think the system is just, only that it is inevitable. That resistance is impractical. That adaptation is maturity. So he adapts. He learns to withhold outrage, to mock sincerity, to measure ethics by efficiency. Even discontent is redirected toward the self, toward others, never toward the design. This is alienation in its most advanced form, the disappearance of the very language that would name it. He does not see the factory anymore. He sees a laptop, a deadline, a performance review. But the logic is the same. Productivity as proof of worth, rest as guilt, time as commodity. He optimizes his sleep, gamifies his attention, monetizes his hobby. The system has updated. The command is no longer obey, it is perform. Perform usefulness, perform resilience, perform positivity. And if he fails, he must do so silently. Every interface becomes an extraction point. His preferences become data. His pauses become metrics. His desires become targeted. What once was intimate is now informational. The line between self and system blurs, not through force, but through convenience. He consents to his own mapping. He becomes his own product. And still, something aches, a kind of homesickness for a place that never existed. Not nostalgia, but longing for a form of relation untouched by transaction. He cannot name it. It has no market equivalent. It doesn't scale, but it returns in grief, in silence, in the way a stranger's gesture undoes him for a moment. The system does not know what to do with this. It can simulate love, but not sustain it. It can model empathy, but not feel it. Its strength is its blindness, but he is not blind, not entirely. He begins to notice the seams, the places where the system glitches, where it forgets to account for tenderness, for contradiction, for the ungovernable rhythm of the human heart. This is not revolution. Not yet. It is recognition that what he is cannot be fully arranged, that the value he carries exceeds what he produces, that he is haunted not by failure but by a fullness the system cannot reach. This haunting is not an error, it is an inheritance, the echo of a world not built to be sold. He begins to listen, not for instructions but for the silence beneath them, not for meaning but for resonance. And in that resonance, he begins not to break free, but to fracture differently. To fold time back towards something real, something the system cannot metabolize. Alienation is not simply a feeling. It is a structure, a precise historical configuration in which what is made becomes estranged from its maker. He produces, but the product does not belong to him. He labors, but the labor does not return to him as affirmation. Instead, it stands apart, owned by another, sold by another, absorbed into a circulation that renders him both essential and replaceable. This is the logic. The more he gives of himself, the less he remains himself. And the estrangement is layered, first from the object, then from the act of creation, then from others, each reduced to competitor, consumer, or customer, finally from himself, not metaphorically, but materially. His senses dulled, his thoughts redirected, his instincts disciplined. The structure does not need to destroy him, it needs to make him productive. It needs him alive enough to work, but not so alive that he asks why. Alienation is also temporal. He is sold time, but it is not his own. Wages are not payment for work, they are compensation for absence. Every hour he labours is an hour lost to himself, and the system convinces him this is fair. He is told to be grateful, to invest, to wait. The future becomes a deferred reward. Retirement, freedom, meaning, always later, never now. He begins to notice how every relationship echoes this logic. Love becomes expectation. Friendship becomes networking. Even rest becomes preparation for further labour. There is no moment untouched by exchange. He has not consented to this, but he has complied. He must. Survival demands it. But survival is not living. Marx named this with precision. He saw how labour, once an expression of species being, our capacity to shape the world with intention, had become inverted. No longer freedom, but compulsion. No longer affirmation, but exhaustion. The worker becomes an appendage of the machine, whether that machine is steel, code, or institution. What once marked his humanity now conditions his subjugation. And yet the contradiction intensifies. The more advanced the system becomes, the more fragile its illusion of stability. As automation spreads, as capital detaches from production and attaches to speculation, the worker is not liberated. He is destabilized, made surplus, made anxious, made disposable. The structure shifts, but the logic remains. More is extracted than is returned. He begins to ask not just what he is making, but what is being made of him. He begins to see labour not as destiny, but as design. And in that recognition, a crack forms. A refusal that begins not with protest, but with perception. A new kind of attention. Not yet revolutionary, but no longer asleep. The system survives by making alternatives unthinkable. It naturalizes itself, cloaks its origins, erases its mutations, buries its violence in logistics and language. He is taught to say the market, not capital. Efficiency, not extraction. Flexibility, not precarity. This is not just ideology. It is ontology reprogrammed. Reality itself begins to speak in the grammar of capital. Even imagination is policed. Utopias are ridiculed. Desires are monetized. Freedom is reframed as choice between curated options. Resistance is pre-simulated, absorbed, aestheticized. He watches stories of rebellion sold back to him as entertainment. He buys the soundtrack. He feels briefly seen, but he remains arranged, and yet contradiction accumulates. The earth warms. The city chokes. The algorithm mispredicts. He is always online, never connected. He has thousands of images of his own face and no memory of what it means to be seen. This is not personal failure. This is the structure failing to contain what it promised to control. It optimized everything and made nothing whole. He begins to notice moments of dissonance. Not political, not yet, but human. A glance too sincere, a silence that refuses efficiency, an interaction not governed by price. These are not solutions, they are interruptions. But in a world built to extract, interruption is sacred. Marx knew that the end would not come from collapse alone. It would come from the recognition that what appears natural is in fact historical, that what seems eternal is contingent. The economy is not a law, it is a decision made and remade through institutions, ideologies and infrastructures. And so he begins to trace the edges, not of capitalism alone, but of its totalizing logic. He sees that capital requires enclosure, of land, of time, of desire. It cannot tolerate commons. It cannot survive trust without contract. It cannot permit rest without justification. But beneath every enclosure is a memory, a time before the fence, a rhythm before the schedule. This memory is not nostalgia. It is insurgent. It refuses to be archived or resolved. It returns not as image, but as impulse, to share, to pause, to make without selling, to belong without branding. These are not relics, they are instructions. The system cannot eliminate these traces. It can only suppress them, but suppression is not erasure, and recognition once begun is difficult to reverse. He does not yet know what comes next, but he knows that what is cannot hold, and that is enough. For now he listens, not to the system, but to the cracks. He begins to see the cracks not as accidents, but as conditions. They do not undermine the structure, they make it visible. The system, for all its power, cannot prevent leakage. Meaning leaks, affection leaks, time leaks, and in these leaks something else lives. Not freedom in the liberal sense, not rebellion in the cinematic sense, but something more precise, more dangerous, reorientation. He notices how people improvise care in places designed for transaction, how workers bend rules to preserve dignity, how strangers become kin when the algorithm fails. These gestures are not scalable, they are not efficient, they are not solutions, but they are real. They mark the refusal to be fully captured. Marx called this the antagonism at the heart of the system, the contradiction between use and exchange, between living labour and dead capital. As the system intensifies its demand for productivity, it also deepens its dependence on what it cannot produce: trust, care, creativity, belief. It needs the human, but it cannot afford the human, and so it counterfeits. It simulates intimacy through interfaces. It performs empathy through automation. It produces novelty without surprise. But he can feel the difference. The simulation exhausts. The real restores, even if it's brief, even if it's fragile. The awareness spreads slowly, not through ideology, but through ache, through quiet moments when the system falters and the world shows through. When someone hesitates before clicking, when someone deletes a post before publishing, when someone stays silent in a meeting, not from fear, but from refusal. These are not signs of despair. They are coordinates of awakening. Marx never claimed the revolution would be immediate. He knew that history bends under pressure, not design. That consciousness does not arise spontaneously, but through accumulation. He knew that freedom was not the absence of structure, but the presence of structures made by and for the living. This is what he begins to imagine, not a utopia, but a shift, from ownership to stewardship, from isolation to interdependence, from extraction to resonance. These are not slogans, they are practices, and they begin now, in the revaluing of slowness, in the redefinition of success, in the quiet decision to remain human in a system that profits from his forgetting. He is not out of the system, he may never be, but he is no longer of it. He carries its marks, its rhythms, its compromises, but he also carries something else, a memory not his, but ancestral, a future not his, but gestating. He is no longer asleep, he is listening, and what he hears is not collapse. It is the sound of something ancient learning to speak again. There is a silence beneath the system that cannot be scheduled. It does not announce itself. It is not dramatic, but it begins to alter his perception. What once seemed unquestionable now appears brittle. What once seemed efficient now feels hollow. He is not choosing to resist. He is starting to see. And once seen, the coordinates cannot be erased. Each day he returns to the structures that demand his participation. He logs in, he complies. But a dissonance has entered the motion. His gestures are no longer automatic. There is drag, there is delay, there is doubt. These are not flaws, they are the emergence of something different, something unscripted by the machinery around him. Marx wrote not just to expose the system, but to diagnose its spiritual cost, the reduction of life to labour, the severing of meaning from action, the transformation of social connection into commodity exchange. This was not simply injustice, it was impoverishment of thought, of relation, of imagination. But impoverishment is not emptiness, it is concealment. And slowly, through the friction of daily life, he begins to uncover what had been buried, the desire to create without being measured, the wish to be seen without being assessed, the ability to care without being surveilled. These capacities have not vanished, they have been displaced. He begins to notice how others carry the same displacement in their size, in their deferrals, in the weight behind their polite replies. These are not signs of weakness. They are evidence that something in them remains intact, unsurrendered, even if unspoken. The system counts on their silence, but silence is not absence, it is storage. Across these small disruptions, a different rhythm starts to surface, one that does not aim to win or to escape, but to remain present in a way the system cannot metabolize. He does not need new tools, he needs new relations, and these begin quietly, wherever the logic of extraction is interrupted by something slower, stranger, more generous. Marx imagined this transformation not as a moment, but as a process, a reconstitution of life from the ground up, not a takeover, but a reconfiguration. He saw that the true potential of humanity lay not in production, but in the capacity to shape the world together for reasons beyond profit. The system cannot see this. It registers only loss when work is not done, but there is something building in the quiet, not rebellion, not revolution, a kind of coherence, a sense that the world could be arranged otherwise, that life is not best lived through maximization, that value can be felt in ways no market can verify. And when he looks up, when he pauses, he realizes he is not alone. Others are slowing too, not out of despair, but because something else is calling. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. For further reading, research, and ways to support the podcast, please visit the episode webpage. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.